morning, everyone. You're watching L24 Nightly News with me, Maryam Zian, bringing you the latest updates from around the world. Right now, the headlines. Hamas and UN experts condemn aid blockade as occupation insists on starving Palestinians by closing crossings. Coming up next, political analysts say that the planned French maneuvers in Morocco, dubbed Sharqi 2025, are part of Paris's bid to reposition itself in Africa. And Moscow warns against EU militarization, and Trump says Russia is easier to deal with than Ukraine. Hello and welcome back to the program. First in our news, Hamas stated that the occupation continues to tighten the siege, close crossings and block aid to Gaza for the 6th consecutive day, calling it part of an ongoing genocide. Spokesperson Abdulatif Al-Qanoua said Friday that the occupation's policy of starvation and collective punishment is a blatant violation of international law and a war crime that must be stopped.
The policy of starvation and collective punishment pursued by the occupation constitutes a blatant violation of international and humanitarian laws, and a war crime that the world must stop and hold its perpetrators accountable. We call on the international community, all human rights and humanitarian organizations, and freedom-loving people worldwide to pressure the occupation to open the crossings, allow the entry of humanitarian and medical aid, and end the suffering of our people.
Israel's ban on goods and aid to Gaza has caused price hikes, worsening shortages and hardships, especially during Ramadan. Hosam Barkan has the report.
The joy of an anticipated ceasefire in Gaza remains incomplete as Ramadan begins. The Zionist blockade continues to strangle the enclave, driving food and water shortages to extreme levels, while prices soar uncontrollably. The closure of border crossings has further intensified the crisis, with residents rushing to market to stockpile whatever essentials they can find, fearing the return of war in just 10 days.
The day after the border crossing were closed, prices skyrocketed uncontrollably. People rushed out of their homes in panic, trying to secure whatever essentials they could, fearing a return to the hardship they endured during the war.
In Gaza's bustling market, amid the rubble of destroyed buildings, particularly in Jabalia, Palestinians examined the skyrocketing prices of basic goods with sorrow and frustration. The occupation deliberately shook supply chains, restricting aid and goods from entering, even when products reach Gaza. Their prices are beyond the reach of most residents. The destruction of warehouses has further crippled food storage capabilities.
We will never accept disarmament. As Palestinians, we are currently living in hardship, suffering from malnutrition and many other struggles. But giving up the weapons of the resistance is completely unacceptable, whether for the youngest or the oldest amongst us.
Since the onset of the genocide, or even the so-called ceasefire, Zionist policy of deprivation has thrown Gaza's market into turmoil, where demand far outweighs supply. Yet, despite starvation and thirst, Gaza pulses with life. Tens of thousands of displaced Palestinians have returned to what remains of their homes, determined to endure even among the ruins.
UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese has condemned Israel's restriction on vital aid deliveries to Gaza, calling it a serious violation of international law. In a joint statement with 30 independent UN experts, Albanese accused Israel of militarizing famine by breaching the ceasefire agreement and halting humanitarian assistance.
Israel is resuming the militarization of famine in Gaza by violating the ceasefire and suspending humanitarian aid. This is a blatant breach of international law, and we are deeply concerned over Israel's decision to block all goods and essential supplies, including life-saving humanitarian aid. As the occupying power, Israel remains permanently obliged to ensure the adequate provision of food, medical supplies, and other relief services. By weaponizing aid once again, Israel is committing grave violations of international humanitarian law and human rights amounting to war crimes and crimes against humanity.
China's foreign ministry called for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and urged faster progress on the truce between Israel and Hamas. At a press conference in Beijing during the annual parliamentary session, Foreign Minister Wang Yi stated that if major powers truly care about Gaza's residents, they should push for a full and lasting ceasefire while ensuring increased humanitarian aid.
If the major powers truly care about the people of Gaza, they must work towards a full and permanent ceasefire and expedite the details of the truce between Israel and Hamas. They should also increase the entry of humanitarian aid into the Strip, as Gaza belongs to Palestinian people and is an inseparable part of Palestinian land. Any attempt to alter Gaza's status by force will not bring peace.
British lawmakers have called on the government to form an independent investigative committee to examine the involvement of successive UK governments in the genocide in Gaza. In a letter to Prime Minister Keir Starmer from Labour Party leader and independent MP Jeremy Corbyn demanded the establishment of a committee to investigate the mistakes committed during Britain's participation in the 2003 US-led invasion of Iraq. He also pointed out the secrecy imposed by London regarding its support for the war of extermination in Gaza. And UNRWA stated that Zionist forces have rendered the refugee camps of Jenin, Tulkarem, and Nur al-Shams in the northern West Bank uninhabitable. In a press release on Friday, UNRWA expressed deep concern over the new patterns of large-scale Israeli demolitions, describing them as the most prolonged and destructive in the camps since the Second Intifada. The agency warned that these actions aim to permanently alter the nature of the camps in the north, with an unprecedented impact on Palestinian refugees. The Israeli occupation has approved strict restrictions on Palestinian worshippers' entry into Al-Aqsa Mosque on Fridays during Ramadan. Only men over 55, women over 50, and children under 12 can enter after security checks. These are the same restrictions as last year, but Palestinian citizens of Israel are excluded. And the Israeli occupation has escalated violations against the Ibrahimi Mosque, closing the Abu Arish checkpoint, limiting worshippers' access and assaulting others. Mosque director Mu'taz Abu Snaina stressed it should be fully open for 10 days yearly as per Israeli decisions following the Ibrahimi Mosque massacre. However, Israel refuses to hand control to the Islamic Waqf, continuing its Judaization efforts. The United Nations Special Envoy to Yemen, Hans Grundberg, has warned that the country's current trajectory is deeply concerning. In a briefing to the UN Security Council, Grundberg reiterated his call for all parties to refrain from military threats and retaliatory measures that could plunge Yemen back into widespread conflict.
While a resumption of large-scale ground operations in Yemen has not occurred since the UN-mediated truce of April 2022, military activity continues. I remain concerned by recent reports of shelling, drone attacks, infiltration attempts, and mobilization campaigns, more recently witnessed in Marib, as well as in other areas such as Al-Jawf, Shabwa, and Taiz. I therefore also reiterate my calls on the parties to refrain from military posturing and retaliatory measures that could risk plunging Yemen back into widespread conflict, where civilians will again pay the price.
The A3+ group at the UN Security Council reaffirmed its commitment to an inclusive political process for achieving lasting peace in Yemen. Speaking on behalf of the A3+ group, comprising Algeria, Somalia, Sierra Leone, and Guyana, Sierra Leone's UN representative Michael Imran Kanu expressed support for the UN Special Envoy's diplomatic efforts to facilitate Yemeni-led political process under UN supervision.
On behalf of the A3 Post members, as this Council remains committed to a Yemeni-owned and Yemeni-led political process that will ultimately bring lasting peace to Yemen, we emphasize the need to preserve the hard-won gains to date and underscore the importance of sustained mediation efforts under the auspices of the UN. In this regard, we would like to highlight the following points. First, in light of Yemen's multifaceted political, security, and humanitarian challenges, we stress the importance of a balanced and inclusive process that ensures the safe and meaningful participation of all Yemenis in building the foundation for lasting peace.
Algeria's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ammar bin Jama, emphasized on behalf of the A3+ group the group's commitment to the Chemical Weapon Convention in Syria. In a session held at the UN Security Council headquarters in New York, bin Jama hailed the constructive cooperation of the authorities in Damascus with the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which has led to the concrete progress.
For greater cooperation, we reaffirm our unwavering commitment in favor of achieving all the objectives of the Chemical Weapons Convention and underline the importance of all states parties to continue to ensure the full, effective, and non-discriminatory implementation of the Convention, while bearing in mind that the threat or the use of chemical weapons remains relevant in the international area. The A3+ reiterates its firm belief that the use of chemical weapons anywhere by anyone and under any circumstances must be condemned.
Algeria is participating in the extraordinary meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Jeddah to discuss Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people and calls for their displacement. A statement from the Algerian Foreign Ministry said Soufiane Chaheb, Minister of State for International Community Abroad, will lead the delegation addressing the occupation's aggression and Syria's reinstatement to the OIC. During the visit, he will also meet with members of the Algerian community in Saudi Arabia. And political analysts say that the planned French maneuvers in Morocco, dubbed Sharqi 2025, are part of Paris's bid to reposition itself in Africa, particularly in the Sahel, which was forced to exit by regional demand. These moves mark an unprecedented escalation amid growing tensions with Algeria. Marwa Balawar.
Pushed out of the Sahel, France is now returning to Africa through Morocco, a move that some see as a dramatic shift in colonial roles. The latest sign of this strategy is a planned French military exercise in Morocco's Rashidiyya region, named Eastern 2025. Following dramatic changes in the Sahel and the expulsion of French forces and corporations, Paris has turned to Rabat. Morocco has offered its territory as a staging ground for operations that some fear could destabilize the region. In exchange for symbolic recognition of Morocco's claim over occupied Western Sahara and a series of high-profile ministerial visits, France is courting Rabat with an eye on alternative economic resources and, more crucially, a new military foothold as its influence in Africa continues to decline. After exiting Niger, Mali, Chad, Burkina Faso, and most recently Côte d'Ivoire, and facing growing international competition in the region, France now sees Morocco as its last remaining gateway into Africa, a platform for foreign interests and a base for regional maneuvers that could threaten stability.
And on the occasion of the International Women's Day, Algerian President Mr. Abdelnajid Tebboune emphasized the vital role of Algerian women in the nation's progress. In his message, he praised their exceptional skills and achievements, whether as professionals across various fields, leaders in governance, or successful entrepreneurs. He also highlighted their active engagement in civil society and community initiatives, their dedication to improving performance and public service, and their equal partnership with men in driving Algeria's development.
The Algerian woman celebrates her International Day in an Algeria determined and capable of achieving comprehensive renaissance. She is inspired by the spirit of challenge and victory from the struggles of great women, resistance fighters whose biographies and heroism in defending the homeland are preserved in memory. On the International Women's Day, with its human symbolism of liberation, Algerian women recall with pride the struggle of the Algerian woman who sacrificed during the glorious liberation revolution and presented immortal models of courage and sacrifice, and became an example to be remembered in the testimony of the struggling female fighters and mujahideen who placed the honor and pride of Algeria above all considerations and made the struggle for its independence the highest decoration and the noblest goal.
President Tebboune reiterated his steadfast commitment to strengthening women's role in the society and empowering them in high-ranking positions.
On this occasion, as we congratulate Algerian women on International Women's Day, we affirm our constant keenness to enhance the status of women in society and to empower them in high-ranking positions and lofty responsibilities, so that Algeria, which is committed to its authenticity, may move towards modernity, sustainable development, and comprehensive renaissance with all its loyal daughters and sons.
The United Nations peacekeeping mission in South Sudan announced the killing of 27 soldiers, including a general, during an evacuation operation in White Nile State, northeast of the White Nile. The UN stated that one of its helicopters came under direct fire, resulting in casualties and serious injuries. It strongly condemned the attack and the ongoing violence across South Sudan. And Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni affirmed that his government will not support any parallel administration formed in Sudan. This was stated by Sudan's Deputy Chairman of the Transitional Sovereignty Council, Melik Agar, following an official visit to Uganda. Sudanese Foreign Minister Hussein Al-Amin Al-Fadil told reporters that Agar held talks with Museveni on Sudan's developments and the significant advances made by the Sudanese army. He also praised Uganda for hosting Sudanese refugees.
The Vice President of the Transitional Sovereignty Council visited Kampala for talks with Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni on Sudan's latest developments and the progress of the armed forces. They also discussed Nairobi's hosting of the so-called political charter signing. Museveni affirmed he would not support any parallel government in Sudan and thanked Uganda for sheltering Sudanese refugees.
Moscow signals possible countermeasures as Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov condemns the EU's growing defense ambitions. His remarks follow a Brussels summit where leaders pushed for increased military spending and aid to Ukraine, a move Russia calls a threat to stability.
We see that the European Union is now actively discussing the militarization of the EU and the development of the defense segment. This is a process that we are watching closely because the EU is positioning Russia as its main adversary. That means this militarization is going on primarily against the Russian Federation. This, of course, could potentially be a topic of deep concern for us, and there could be a need to take appropriate measures in response.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry called for the necessity of holding negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. Foreign Minister Wang Yi called on Friday for reaching a fair and durable peace deal that is binding and accepted by all the parties concerned to end the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
China has been calling for a political solution through dialogue and consultation from the first day the crisis broke out. We have always been working vigorously to facilitate talks for peace. China welcomes and supports all efforts dedicated to peace. At the same time, we must also see that the root cause of this crisis is complicated. It takes consistent freezing temperatures over time to form thick ice, while resolving the Ukraine crisis will not be a one-day job. However, no one wins in a conflict, but everyone gains in peace. The negotiation table is where the conflict ends and peace starts.
U.S. President Donald Trump told reporters at the White House on Friday he was finding it more difficult to deal with Ukraine and that it may be easier to deal with Russia as his administration seeks to reach a peace agreement. Earlier on Friday, Trump raised the prospect of imposing large-scale U.S. sanctions on Russia days after pausing aid and intelligence sharing to Ukraine and called on both countries to get on with negotiating a peace deal.
I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine. And they don't have the cards. They don't have the cards. As you know, we're meeting in Saudi Arabia on sometime next week, early. And we're talking, I find that in terms of getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards.
Also, U.S. President Donald Trump has postponed tariffs on most goods imported from Mexico for 4 weeks following a phone call with the Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. This decision follows statements from U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick regarding the potential delay of Trump's plan to impose a 25% tariff on goods and services from Canada and Mexico for a month. This extension broadens the exemptions Trump had previously granted to the auto industry. And Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum thanked her U.S. counterpart Donald Trump for a respectful call, saying that her government security measures have been working in the reduction of fentanyl tariffs into the U.S. as Washington temporarily eased tariffs. After the call, Trump announced that Mexico would not be required to pay tariffs on any goods that fall under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement trade deal until April the 2nd.
Después de hablar con la presidenta de México, Claudia Sheinbaum.
After talking with the President of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, we agreed that Mexico will not have to pay tariffs on anything that is included on the TMEC agreement. Virtually all the trade we have with the United States is within the Mexico-US-Canada treaty. There is a part that has to do with rules of origin, but everything is particularly within the trade agreement.
U.S. Head of State Donald Trump stated that he wants to negotiate a nuclear deal with Iran, revealing that he sent a letter to Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei on Thursday expressing hope that Tehran would agree to talks. In an interview with Fox Business aired on Friday, Trump said he conveyed to Iranian leadership his desire for negotiations, arguing that such talks would be much better for Iran. Meanwhile, the International Atomic Energy Agency reported in the latest assessment that Iran has significantly increased its stockpile of highly enriched uranium at 60% purity, describing the development as extremely concerning. And the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, warned that U.S. President Donald Trump policies could lead to a new nuclear arms race. In an interview with Bloomberg, Grossi stated that several countries are now reconsidering the need for their own nuclear deterrent. He noted that discussions about acquiring nuclear weapons, once considered taboo, have now become a topic of debate in many nations, reflecting a continuous erosion of international norms on nuclear non-proliferation. And a South Korean court annulled an arrest warrant against President Yoon Suk-yeol on Friday, paving the way for his release from prison after he was detained in mid-January on charges of rebellion against martial law. The Seoul Central District Court, which revoked the warrant, stated that its ruling was based on the timing of the indictment, which came after the expiration of the initial detention period. The court also raised questions about the legitimacy of the investigation, which was conducted by two separate agencies. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings our coverage to a close for tonight. If you missed any part of it, you can check our social media platforms. Thank you for watching. Have a great night.